Welcome. I'm Kinetic Symphony. I hunt down and report on mysterious and weird true stories, from glitches to the paranormal. Case file number 272, written by divertss, UFOs 3 ways. I had the exact same experience when I saw a UFO on 3 separate occasions. First occasion, I was at a bonfire with about 12 other people. I looked up at the sky to see a light zooming around in a way that a plane could absolutely never do. Hard stops, retrace the path, instant turns. And a light on it that was blinking in 3 levels of intensity, in descending order. Bright, medium, dim, bright, medium, dim. I pointed this out to my friend sitting next to me, skipping conversational details here for length. I spent around 10 minutes pleading with him to just look up, but it was so bizarre. It was like he couldn't hear me, despite being a couple feet away. When he did hear me, he would respond monotone and disconnected from his normal self. I walked around and asked every person to look up. Just tilt your head and look up. And everyone was the same. Nobody, not once, even moved their head to just look. Everyone had the same disconnected attitude and seemed like they couldn't hear me. Later in the night, at around 4 a.m., my friend suddenly remembers what I was telling him and couldn't explain why he wouldn't look up. All he remembers was me trying to get him to look up like he was in a dream. Second occurrence. Outside smoking a cigarette with a friend at like 10 p.m. We're near a city, so the light pollution is pretty high. I look at the sky and again I see that same light with the same sequence. It's still very distinct and I point it out to him. He looks over at it but doesn't say anything. I'm trying to talk to him about it, but he never said a word for the entire cigarette break. We had been hanging out for a few hours, so I know nothing was wrong. It gave me the same feeling of disconnectedness as before. 20 minutes after we get inside, and he remembers it and starts freaking out about what we just saw. He can't explain why he was acting that way. Third occurrence. I got locked out of the apartment with my girlfriend at the time. My brother was off of work in an hour to let us in, so we're just hanging out. Then I see it again. I point to it and say, "Look at it." She never looked, never said anything, never spoke while we were out there. Brother lets us in and I'm telling him about it, and then she says she doesn't know why she didn't look. No one knows why they won't look. And it was the same pattern, the same disconnect. All of these happened over the course of 8 years. I guess roughly every 4 years. I'm just baffled by this. Only told this to one person before. But another story I read on here motivated me to share it. Edit. Each time I watched it until it was gone, and each time it departed the same way. Its light pattern seemed to change. Bright mid, dim to mid, dim, blank. Then after a minute, dim, blank, blank. On the 3rd time, I realized this is probably what it would look like as it's getting further away. The bright became mid, and mid became low, and then low was blank at a distance. Then at a greater distance, only the bright was visible, but that was dim. Then it was just gone. Case file number 273, written by Most Champion, typing to spooky. It started a week ago roughly, and has happened multiple times. First off, I want to mention that I live alone and don't have any pets. Last week I went to sleep around 2 a.m. and had my MacBook Pro closed, completely, on the floor. While I was in the bed, I started to hear typing on the keyboards. It wasn't cracking or anything like that, it was just typing, and I'm not imagining it at all. It lasted several minutes and then eventually stopped. I freaked out like crazy that night, but eventually managed to fall asleep. The next day, I also went to bed late. I fell asleep and woke up in the middle of the night by the typing noises of the keyboard. It wasn't a dream, nor am I crazy. It really happened. I was very scared, so I turned on all the lights and the typing stopped. My computer was still closed, shut down. So I turned off all the lights and 10 minutes later, I heard the typing on the keyboard again. This time too, it lasted for a lot. I almost had a panic attack. Keep in mind, again, I live alone. It happens again other nights. Every time it happens after I go to sleep. It can be right after I go to sleep and put the MacBook down, or many hours later in the early morning while I'm still asleep. It never happens while I'm using the computer myself. Last night I couldn't sleep because I heard weird noises coming from the window, like some weird gush of wind, loud noises around my windows, and of course the typing on my computer. I'm honestly terrified. What can this be? It doesn't make any sense. I was thinking I'm either spied on by some agency that managed to infiltrate my computer and search for something. But what? I've nothing to hide and I'm a completely average guy. Never committed any crime whatsoever. And even then, if the computer is closed, how can I hear the typing? I mean, even if they infiltrated, I shouldn't hear typing on my keyboard. Or is it something paranormal? I read that I'm not the first guy who's heard typing of a keyboard at night, and other people who experienced it were equally frightened. Some of them used a mechanical keyboard which is exposed at night. I have a MacBook Pro and my keyboard isn't exposed because at night I close my PC, in the sense that I shut the screen above my keyboard so it's not exposed. There's nothing to type on. If you're enjoying this video, consider giving it a like. Now on to the next story. Bonus file, written by also no name. Mimic casts deception. Child resists. When I was about 8 or 9, can't remember the exact age, I visited my relative's apartment with my mom. My father bought me a cute doll from overseas and I wanted to show it to everyone in that household. While my mom was talking to the relatives, I decided to visit their neighbor's apartment. I knew them well and had been to their place many times. I went to that flat and greeted some family members sitting in the living room. I then took the stairs to go to the upper floor. I remember the upper floor was dark and the only light was coming from the veranda. I saw 2 family members sitting and talking. I went to them, showed them my doll, and walked back to the dark hallway to reach the stairs that would then take me back to the first floor. That's when I saw a woman walking into the room at the back of the hallway. From the back, she looked so much like one of the women who lived in that flat. I thought of following her into the room as I wanted to show her my doll. Before I entered that room, I became very scared for some reason. Part of the reason may be because the room was pitch black and I was confused why she wouldn't turn on the light. I was worried she might hide in the corner trying to jump at me in the dark, so I decided not to go into the room and went downstairs, only to find that same woman in the kitchen on the first floor. I didn't see her on my way in, but she had been downstairs all along. I told her what I saw upstairs, and she exchanged a funny look with another family member and just brushed me off. By the way, there were no guests in the house. I don't know who I saw. I told my mom about it later too. She also brushed it off, but I later overheard her talking to my dad about some funny things going on in that apartment after they brought in a harp-like musical instrument. My mom said they would hear someone playing the harp at night, and when they checked, the sound would stop. I've been intrigued by mimic stories, especially because of this childhood experience. This is the one and only encounter I have with anything paranormal. From where I come from, there are beliefs and warnings about mimics. For example, hikers and hunters are told not to call each other by their real names, as mimics can lure them to make them lost by calling their names in the voice of someone they know. They could also trick you by looking like your friends and make you follow them. Do you have such beliefs in your country? If you have similar stories to share, I would like to hear them. Bonus file, written by slapmybigtoe. This picture proves the afterlife. For some context, my dad passed away at the very end of January this year. I suspect it was an accidental overdose because of his substance abuse issues, but no one in the family wanted to look further into it, so we never got a further autopsy. I think his autopsy note said something like a heart attack. He usually texted and called me daily, and saw me weekly, but after not texting me for a few days, I got worried and called the police to do a welfare check. An hour later, they called back with the news. Unfortunately, he's deceased. Those words run through my head now all the time. I had deep regrets when he passed. He was always a hypochondriac and also just came up with excuses and minor problems that only I could be able to fix. I.e., the Netflix was broken. He usually just didn't know how to restart the PS3 when the app crashed. Or my rabbit, who he cared for, was sick. So when he texted me at odd hours, a couple days before I called the police, saying that my rabbit isn't eating, I didn't take him very seriously. I met him for lunch a day before he stopped responding, and he was very shaky and said he wasn't feeling well. But he said that weekly, so I figured I had no reason to worry. It's been the same story for years. I was wrong. Once I got that phone call back saying he was gone, my world stopped. For the past several months, I've been fairly in denial. I went through his belongings after it happened, but my family wasn't interested in helping, and we ultimately ended up hiring a lady to do an estate sale for us. I grabbed what I could think to hold on to and ended up with a lot of stuff in boxes that I hadn't even looked through, at least not too well. This will be relevant later. A few weeks ago, I had a dream. I haven't dreamed of him since he passed. When it first happened, I wished to see him one last time. But as time went on, I began to give up on seeing his ghost or his presence one last time. That idea fully faded away, so I am forever grateful for this experience I was given weeks ago. I dreamed that I was in a house I didn't recognize. It was clearly very old. My dad was born in 1947, if that holds any relevance to this house being so old. I walked up to a kitchen island and sat at the bar stool, which is when I see my dad, easily 20 years younger, walk out of a room opposite from me. A small brown and white dog I had never seen before came out with him. I remember not being able to identify the breed, but the characteristics of the dog burned into my memory. Black nose, fluffy brown with white and blonde patches, and very small. He followed the dog walking towards me. I forget how the conversation started, but I know I began crying rather quickly. He looked so good. He was wearing a long-sleeve blue patterned dress shirt that he used to wear a long time ago. I cried and he asked me, "What's wrong, kiddo? I'm better now. You don't believe me?" And I responded with, "I do believe you. You look happier and healthier. That's why I'm crying." He told me not to worry. He would be okay and so would I. And then he said goodbye, left the front door, and I woke up sobbing. It was a good bit of closure for me, and I've hung on to it since it happened. I figured my mind was creating that memory for me, to cheer me up and provide me that closure. But 2 days ago, I started sorting through some stuff that's been in boxes for several months, and I came across a folder I don't remember. It was full of old pictures, his old girlfriends in the 60s and 70s, cars and stuff. I didn't remember grabbing it, but it was a nice bit of memories to hold on to. One picture stood out though. It made me genuinely lose my breath and tear up when I saw it. That exact same little dog from that dream, who I'd never seen in my life. A photograph that was decades old. I texted my aunt and she confirmed that it was one of his favorite little dogs, but I forget what she said his or her name was. I didn't even tell her what had happened. I described the dog and she told me how much he loved that dog without skipping a beat. I like to believe it really was my dad in that dream. He had the strength to come back and bring one of his favorite pups along with him, because he was a huge animal lover and I wouldn't expect it any other way. I don't know what I believe happens to us when everything is over, but I believe him when he said that he's okay. I believe that wherever he is, he's happy. I'm forever thankful for that.